So, look, I know FNAF 2 is already out, okay? But a promise is a promise, and I intend to keep as many as I can, even if it means getting to everything far too late. Anyway, in preparation for what I'm hoping will be a batshit second installment in the Five Nights at Freddy's movie franchise, I decided to hop back over to the first movie and rewatch it. And since it only makes sense to talk about the first movie before rambling about the second, we're here and we're doing this, and I don't care anymore. But first, I'd like to apologize to everyone who is still waiting for my Sonic movie reviews. I understand those were promised to you some time ago, and don't worry, they're still coming before the fourth movie arrives. But we have a backlog of things to push through first, and this is the start of the end of the constipation. Don't worry, we will get there. But this isn't just going to be a FNAF review. No, that would be too bland, too simple. Instead, I want to talk about what makes FNAF different from most other movies, particularly what makes it different from most other video game movies. Because FNAF is, in fact, an auteur movie, nay, a film that can only be understood by those who've played the games. You need to have a high IQ to understand the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Am I using the word masterpiece in the title rather loosely? You better fucking believe it. But at the same time, there is something masterful about the way Scott Cawthon translates the games to the big screen, something that I haven't seen any other video game adaptation franchise do, and something no others will probably attempt. See, video game movies aren't just pulling from their source material and slapping it onto the big screen. They're tailor-made for the medium, including a different structure, defined character arcs, and of course, plenty of references for viewers who are familiar with the original narratives. But those viewers, while making up a number of moviegoers, aren't the only ones video game movies are trying to appeal to. Sonic the Hedgehog's familiar character archetypes and arcs from the games, and use of well-known storylines, such as Shadow's backstory, aren't just there for fan service. The Super Mario Bros. Movie, despite its many flaws, uses the established lore of the Mario games to make its world feel fleshed out and lived in. But these elements of the game on the big screen aren't just there for the fans. They exist so even someone who's never picked up a copy of Sonic, or doesn't even know what a Bowser is, can watch the movie and understand what's going on. The iconography is familiar for the fans, but it's not necessary to understand before watching these movies. Because the movies explain it to moviegoers, because that's the target audience now, and there's no guarantee they've played the games before. FNAF, on the other hand, goes in the complete opposite direction of this very notion. Now, yes, there are some elements of the film that establish familiar ideas so general movie audiences know what's going on. The opening scene, for example, pays homage to the games while also establishing the bare-bones threat, a bunch of animatronics coming to life at night to turn night guards at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza into tomato sauce. The movie also does a pretty decent job at establishing Mike Schmidt and his little sister, Abby, as the core protagonists of the adaptation. This includes differentiating it from the original lore, where Mike had familial ties to William Afton. Of course, in this version, there very much still are those ties. In Afton's first appearance, he's working as a career counselor for Mike while using a name that's somewhat reminiscent of Shaggy Rogers. Cheeky reference, or my neuroses acting up? You be the judge! He ends up giving Mike the security job at Freddy's because he recognizes his last name as being the same as another victim, Garrett, that he killed decades before. Even though Schmidt is a pretty common German surname, but whatever, the movie is full of plot holes that I ignore because I like wearing my rose-tinted glasses and no one can pry them off my face. The movie also does a decent job at establishing the animatronics for non-viewers. Sure, they lack individuality for you unless you've already played the games. Well, except Foxy, who's still just as much a bastard here as he is in the original. Come to think of it, he felt like the only one with a distinct personality. Sure, Chica had a gimmick with the cupcake, but Foxy got the most kills, and he did it while looking cool. Veering back on track, hopefully without hitting any pedestrians, the movie's familiar visuals, names, and faces don't feel off-putting to a general audience on Mike's first night. Sure, we get a Balloon Boy reference, but even for a normal audience goer, the goofy jump scare is just that, a goofy jump scare. Now, the dream stuff, which is completely new for veterans and newcomers alike, felt like a way to try and spice up the nights prior to Abby, inevitably accompanying Mike on his job. And you know what? I kind of like the dream stuff. Yeah, it obfuscated the animatronics as constant threats, but I think it worked well because there's no way Movie Mike would actually stay for a whole week if there were something trying to kill him for the first few nights. So far, nothing's happened that would alienate a normal audience member. But then, things take a turn, and it all starts with Vanessa. See, Vanessa is a character from the games. Specifically, she's from FNAF Security Breach, the first and the second arc of the franchise. And, in the games, she's a villain. Related to Afton in some capacity, she dresses in a bunny suit similar to Springtrap, Wood calling herself Vanny. Wait, why did I write Wood? Oh, yeah, okay. Would. But in the movie, Vanessa is a police officer helping Mike. Or at least vaguely telling Mike that Freddy's is the Transformers theme song while also still being attached to the animatronics despite knowing what they are. The movie presents Vanessa as a vague ally of sorts who knows more than she lets on, but who clearly does care about Mike. Seriously, the two share a moment down by a river or whatever. That's textbook symbolism for a soon-to-be unbreakable bond, especially for a movie with a simple story structure. And yet, for viewers who do know about Vanessa from the games, they don't know if they can trust her. Not just because of the information she withholds for way too fucking long. Seriously, dude, what are you doing? But also because of her presentation in the games being so different. There's an inherent lack of trust you're supposed to have for her because of the games, and it's palpable throughout most of her conversations with Mike. Viewers already know who she is and how she's connected to the lore. At least that's the way the movie presents her, as if audience members are already aware that she holds a deep connection to Freddy's. Yes, the movie does spell some of this out, but the level of mistrust you're supposed to have, that the movie seemingly expects you to have, doesn't really translate that well. Thereby, it's almost like it wants you to have known who Vanessa is prior to having sat down in the movie theater. But she's really just a small example of what I mean, because there's also the twist with the animatronics themselves. While a series of kills from the goons who break into the restaurant establish the core four as threatening murder machines, the same can't be said when Mike brings Abby to the restaurant. In a twist, they're more docile around her, as her innocence appears to be another side of the coin. The other side being Afton's evil energy that controls them through a drawing somehow. Look, just roll with it, okay? Not only is this a complete contrast to how they've been around other antagonists, but it's also completely different from how they behave in the games. Okay, I know I sound crazy, and I am, but hear me out for a second. If you were a casual audience member who knew nothing about Five Nights at Freddy's, you could make the assumption that the animatronics are docile toward people who treat them the same way. After all, the only so-called innocent we've seen them kill was the first night guard. But we don't really know anything about him, nor do we know what his previous encounters with them might have been like. All we know is that the animatronics appear to target people who, for the most part, have bad intentions. The reason they visit Mike in his dreams can be inferred as them having some kind of connection to him via Garrett, which isn't too difficult to puzzle out. So why leave Mike alone, but attack the previous night guard if the previous night guard wasn't evil? Therefore, a casual audience member would assume the animatronics only attack people in self-defense. Hell, when Mike approaches Abby while she's with them, their eyes start glowing red, as if they want to defend Abby more than they want to attack Mike. So it's reasonable to assume the animatronics aren't evil, just misunderstood. This difference from the games is the first impression for anyone who hasn't played them. And yeah, you can argue they are misunderstood in the games, but they're also much more bloodthirsty and way less selective about who they kill. If this were the game animatronics, there would not be table forts and musical performances. And I think this bait and switch for how the animatronics act works better on people who know them from the games rather than people who are expecting something else. By this point in time, newcomers have seen only 2 sequences of the animatronics killing people, while fans have been watching it happen for almost 10 years. The twist of them having kind souls that are corrupted by Afton's influence kinda defeats some of the horror elements expected by general audience members. But for fans, it's a breath of fresh air. It's a glimpse into a different side of the children's souls, a reminder that these are, in fact, children stuffed inside the animatronics. But here's the real kicker, and the biggest reason why all of this matters. The audience doesn't know they're possessed by the souls of dead kids by this point in the movie. Sure, they can interpret it from Mike's dreams, but at the same time, they don't understand the full context, that the animatronics are possessed by murdered children whose behavior is tethered to a serial killer's influence. There's very little explanation going on here, yet there's also an expectation that the audience fully understands the context. And while anyone paying attention can pretty reasonably assume what's going on, minus the Afton stuff, the movie doesn't do much to fully encapsulate the scope, despite the twist. It feels sorta half-baked, but it feels half-baked on purpose, like Scott Cawthon wants this movie to appeal to longtime fans more than to the wider movie-going audience. And this really feels cemented by the way the twists in the third act are handled. The biggest, I think, is the one involving Golden Freddy. Throughout the movie, it's implied this kid with the brown shirt is Freddy. The color scheme matches up with him, plus it's Five Nights at Freddy's, and he's the one being the most communicative with Mike. But then, when he arrives at the Schmidt house to take Abby with him, it's revealed he's actually Golden Freddy. But they never say it by name. Instead, it's only heavily implied based on his color scheme and ability to teleport. This information is never given to the audience, which makes it seem like the 5 dead kids are possessing Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the cupcake. But no, that's not the case. Golden Freddy is a completely different character, but the movie just acts like you already know this information, when most moviegoers just don't. And the same goes for everything involving William Afton at the end of the movie. The whole sequence feels like something out of a FNAF fever dream. Old Willy Boy just strolls up in a rundown Springlock Bonnie suit, like that's even a good idea at all, and starts gloating about how he wants to kill Mike. Then Abby replaces the drawing of the kids trusting Yellow Bonnie with one that jogs their memory about how this guy fucking murdered them. And so they start walking in a circle around him as he dies in the same way as FNAF 3, shouting about how he will always come back in a way that would leave general audiences entirely confused about what the fuck he's sputtering on about. And I think this ending really encapsulates whatever half-baked point I'm trying to make in this video. The first FNAF movie does, in fact, have plenty of elements at the start that make you think it's going to be like your typical video game movie. One where there's enough context to ease new audience members into the concepts of the source material through a new medium. But then, right around the halfway point, it throws all of that out the window in favor of ideas and sequences that just do not make sense at all to anyone who hasn't played the games before. What does Afton mean by "I will always come back"? Why is there a mid-credits scene of Corey X Kenshin getting jump-scared by a Balloon Boy toy? And why does Freddy all of a sudden become a yellow-tinted eldritch abomination ghost that drags Abby to the restaurant? All of these ideas need the context of the games in order to survive in someone's vision. Does that make sense? Do I ever make sense? Point is, there's a lot about FNAF, especially in the back half, that you just can't fully understand if you haven't played the games. The way Scott Cawthon approached writing the movie makes it feel like he used the assumption the audience would have game knowledge as a jumping off point. It's like he was writing the movie not for a general audience or as a way to deliver a similar but different story tailored for the big screen. Instead, it feels like a remixed rendition that expects you to already have knowledge of the source material. It's not an adaptation in the same way that Sonic or Mario are adaptations. It's an alt-universe fanfic written by the creator of the franchise, draped in the trappings of a typical video game movie, when, in reality, there's no possible way to fully understand the film, especially the final act, unless you've played the games. And that's what makes this movie so fascinating to me, and what makes it fall into the category of an auteur film. For those who aren't as frivolously learned as yours truly, an auteur film is one where the creative vision is almost entirely steered by the input of a single person. The ideas that define the movie, or any work really, are fully from the perspective of one creative. Now yes, the FNAF movie was directed by Emma Tammy, who also co-wrote the script with Cawthon alongside Seth Cudback. I'm definitely not pronouncing that right. But you can tell from the assumptive approach to some elements of the game lore that Cawthon had a heavy hand in scripting, and if he didn't, then he at least steered the movie in a direction where outside knowledge was almost necessary to enjoy it. No other video game movies do this. Not really. You could make an argument that the Minecraft movie does this to some extent, but even that had an intro with Jack Black pretending to be Steve and all the other tutorial tier dialogue he had throughout the film. Yes, I did end up seeing the Minecraft movie. I have a life outside your screen, you know. But for the most part, every video game adaptation stands on its own. You can watch the Sonic trilogy having never seen anything Sonic related in your life. And despite the number of references, the same can be said for the Mario movie too. They weave their game elements into their stories in ways that make it so general audiences can see them. But FNAF? Well, if my rundown didn't make it clear enough, the first movie very much relies upon knowing more before you watch. And even though the movie's not perfect, I do think, as an auteur video game adaptation, it succeeds in being something unique. I think I liked it more the first time because I saw it in theaters with friends who are FNAF fans, and also because the high schoolers next to me kept pointing at the screen and whispering "The Bite of 87" every 5 minutes. Shout out to you guys, this video's for you. The second go around, I definitely noticed a lot more flaws and holes in the story. By the end, it felt like we were moving from scene to scene, not because it made complete storytelling sense, but because Scott and perhaps the other writers wanted to deliver a gamer-centric climax. And in that regard, I do think they did a good job. Hype-wise, it was cool to see Afton's death happen on the big screen, and the way it left off with a cryptic teaser for Springtrap was also pretty neat, but the exactness of what those symbols mean, once more, appeals to those who are already in the know, thus making FNAF an interesting, auteur-centered approach to making a video game movie. And now, because I swear to God there's going to be one person who thinks my observations here mean I'm saying this was a bad thing, I need to preemptively set the record straight. I actually do like that Cawthon and his fellow co-writers took the chance and made the movie the way they wanted to. Because even if it's not perfect, I think it helps the franchise stand out among a sea of video game movies that utilize retellings and nostalgia more prominently. Which also isn't bad, by the way. My favorite video game movie is Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and it does both of those things. But the FNAF movie builds on the games instead of merely adapting between them. It feels like an offshoot where you're supposed to catch the differences and similarities to the source material. Maybe that's even where the fantasy and fun come to life. Eh? Eh? Nah? Nah? I really need to find like a really solid ledge one of these days. Now, with FNAF 2 already out, and this script being written before I've seen the squeakquel... Fuck me. Now, with FNAF... Now, with FNAF 2 already out, and this script being written before I've seen the squeakquel... Fuck, why does it keep getting me? Now, with FNAF 2 already out, and this script being written before I've seen the squeakquel, I'm not sure if this auteur approach carries over to the second movie. But whether it does or doesn't, nothing can change the fact that the first film is entrenched in this approach, and because of it, will stand out among a sea of video game adaptations past, present, and future. Not a perfect movie, of course, but one that interests me, because of how different its presentation is. I look forward to seeing what Scott does with the rest of the movies, and to see how much this presentation carries over into the evolution of the franchise in film. Depending on how good, or how bad, yeesh, FNAF 2 is, I'll either make a video about it with the same approach as this one, or just rip the fucker to shreds. But either way, the first one will always stand out to me because of the elements I discussed here, and I'm interested to see what they do next. I feel like that last sentence is gonna bite me in the ass in the end.